Welcome to part 2 of my newly refreshed, completely recreated paper quilling introduction tutorial, where I'm going to be making a framed floral pendant. We've got our bottle of slightly thinned out PVA glue. I use a clear glue. We have our paper strips that we cut in part 1, and we have our tool, which I've got 2 tools today, a regular quilling tool and an awl, just in case I need one. I'm going to take 3 of my black paper strips and placing a tiny drop of glue at the end, and then dabbing it a little bit with my finger to spread it out. And then I'm going to connect the 2 strips together very carefully, just overlapping them a little bit, about maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch or less. And then holding it for a few seconds, a few moments, having that patience, building that patience to let it dry a second, and able to sometimes use that little dab of glue that's left on my finger from when I spread it out. This time it was still there, so I used it instead of wasting it. Now we'll just leave that strip to dry for a moment. In our kit, or in your tool collection, we have a square and a round stepped quilling mandrel. And today, for this project, I'm going to make a floral framed pendant in a round frame. So I'll be wrapping the black paper strip around the round frame, around the round mandrel rather, to make the round frame. And I like to, I'm going to make kind of a medium-sized one on the 6th ring down of our stepped mandrel, and I'm just going to try to keep track of that. And instead of going over and around from behind, I like to come under and around from the front, and again make sure that you're on the step or ring of the mandrel that your desired frame size will be using. So I'm going to wrap it around from underneath, from behind, and I'm going to hold it very tightly and wrap it as smoothly as I can and as tightly to the mandrel as I can. This is our moment to spend a little extra time and fuss about making sure that it's nice and straight and nice and smooth before we put our drop of glue, let it dry, and hold it for a few moments. And then we can continue adding glue to the length of the black paper strip, smoothing it slightly with our finger to spread the glue out to the entire piece of paper, and working a few inches at a time and going very slowly and carefully, trying not to get too much of that wet glue on the outside of the paper or even on the mandrel. And if we do, we can wipe it off, wipe our hand a little bit, and keep going until you get to the end of the paper strip for a nice substantial thickness to your black quilled paper frame. Put a little extra glue at the end and just smooth it down very carefully. And we're going to press it against the mandrel a little bit to just make sure that all the glue is tightly connected, and leave it to the side to dry for a few moments. Next, I'll prepare the blue paper strips for the flower petals, and depending on whether you want to make a 6-petaled flower or a 5-petaled flower, and depending on how large you want your flower to be, which, remember, it has to fit inside of the frame, and it might take a little bit of experimentation, but for this size of frame, which is about 1 to 1 1/4 inches in diameter, I'll be making a 5-petaled flower for this project, and I'll save that other blue strip for a different project. I'm going to take each of my 6 paper strip pieces that are now half of the original length. And since this was an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, they'll be approximately 5 to 6 or 6.5 inches, depending on how accurately you tear them in half. And remember, this is nature, so it doesn't have to be completely exact. And we're going to twist each strip into a tight coil, hold it for a moment, and then let it go off of the tool, and let it go and pop out into its desired shape. And then we're going to take the end and, as usual, put a little bit of glue from our bottle of thinned out PVA glue. And with no affiliations yet, I'm using Aleene's Craft Glue, a clear version, and we're going to press the end smoothly and just make sure that it's nice and flat. And at this time, you can also squeeze your coil into a flower shape. As you can see here, I've created 2 and now 3, doing exactly what I just showed you. We're going to create number 4 and our 5th strip coiled into a circle, glued down, and then made into a teardrop shape by pressing the end. Pressing one end into a point and leaving the rest of it as a round circle. Here is the 6th paper strip if you wanted to make a 6-petaled flower. Back to my original 5 petals, and now I'm going to tear, or you can also cut, I prefer to tear, my paper strip from my orange flower center. And sometimes I use a little piece of the blue glued to the orange in the very center to just bring that blue color into the center of the flower petal. It just adds a little bit of contrast. And of course you can use any color you want for this. For the flower petal center, I like to keep it tightly coiled, so I'm going to hold it into the shape that it came off of the tool in, glue it down with a tiny dab of glue in that small tight coiled shape. And I'm going to hold it for a moment so that it stays glued. And then we can place it into our design and start playing around with our flower petals, moving them around into a pleasing arrangement. Sometimes you might want to bend the tip of the teardrop shape into a slight angle or curve to make it look a little more natural, and you can play around with that. With one of our green strips, I'm going to split that in 2. And I'm going to just kind of eyeball about 1/4 inch for just the hint of a stem. And if you don't want to make a stem and a leaf, you're more than welcome to leave this part out. The stem and the leaf, and of course everything is completely optional, your choice to make this project or not. And I'd like to say, as a little bit of a segue at this moment, I really appreciate you for watching this, and I hope that the fact that I've redone one of my earlier tutorials to make it what I feel is much more cohesive and easy to understand and a little bit shorter. We've got part 1 with our paper cutting. Once you have your paper strips, this right here is the one you want. And I'm just going to continue bending my green strip until it is about the length and thickness that I want. Gluing that last little bit down as usual with a nice little extra drop of glue. This one I'm going to curve a little bit so that it has a little bit of a naturalistic bend to it. And I'm going to try to just set it up inside of the paper quilled petals. It's a little hard to get it to balance sometimes, but I just want to start playing around with my pieces and sort of making my design, and that'll be even easier once I complete this leaf, which is going to be completed in the exact same way that we did our petals, by allowing the shape to relax and open up a little bit as we bring it off of our quilling tool, adding that little dab of glue to the end, bringing it around smoothly and gluing it flat, holding it in place for a couple of moments, and then pinching it to make the lovely little teardrop shape. And for the leaf, you may want to experiment with some smaller or larger shapes, maybe elongated, maybe a little smaller, or a little bit bigger than the flower petals with the leaf. It's a different color, so obviously it's going to be obvious that it's not one of the flower petals. And we're going to just maybe play around with our petals and leaves and stems just a little tiny bit to try to figure out where we want everything. And of course, it all has to fit within our frame, so keep that in mind. Maybe test your design as you go along, and if anything needs to be made a little bit smaller, you can do that now instead of waiting until the end and finding out that your flower doesn't fit inside of your frame. So we're going to carefully glue, as you saw me just do, each flower petal to the center. And if you space them out correctly, they should fit just perfectly. You want to hold the glued piece in place for a few moments, and maybe even put it down for a minute or two before picking it up again and putting the next piece on. It's really annoying when you're trying to glue the next piece on and the piece that you put on before pops right off because you haven't let it dry for long enough. So here we are with our 4 flower petals connected to the flower center, and I'll be gluing on my last flower petal for the 5-petaled flower, using a little bit of extra glue all the way around so that the pieces connect on both sides to the flower petal that I'm adding, so that all the flower petals are now connected together and to the flower center. This 5-petaled flower, I'm going to leave it to dry for a few moments. And in a natural space that was still remaining, I'm going to place the flower stem so that it appears to be growing directly out of the flower. Let that dry, obviously, and then glue on the flower petal leaf, in the same way that we glued on our petals. I'm going to keep the leaf close to the stem, and I'm going to use glue on both sides, and I've pinched the teardrop shape at both ends of the leaf so that it's kind of pointy and elongated on both sides. And I'm going to hold that in place and let it dry for a while. As you can see, it turned out very cute. And now there's going to be a little bit of a dance, a little bit of a manipulation. If your piece is glued together very well, then nothing disastrous should occur right now. And just gently push pieces of petal and manipulate them. You can use a tool. This little awl tool might work. I've got these long fingernails right now that just sort of happen to grow. And every leaf, I'm just going to push every petal and every piece of stem gently. At some point, there's going to be this wonderful moment where everything just sort of pops into place. And this is about the absolute maximum size of petals and flower that could fit inside of this size of frame that I used on the 6th level of our mandrel. So if you didn't want to have to break the flower pieces a little bit smaller, you might want to use the 7th step down, or tear your flower pieces a little bit smaller. And there you have it, Framed Floral Pendant Part 2. And don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, comment, and share.